bury their child. The devastating loss profoundly affected Lynn. The grieving mother began drinking heavily to drown her sorrow in alcohol. However, alcohol could not bring her son back. It only made things worse. Over time, Lynn found the strength to start her journey to sobriety. She even began attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Exactly 2 years after the loss of their first child, the Stellers had another chance to become a happy family. In February 1983, their second son, Matthew Colin, was born. Of course, he could not replace the son they lost, but he undoubtedly became a light that brightened the life of his grief-stricken mother. Unfortunately, by that time, the relationship between the spouses had already deteriorated, and soon Lynn and Bob's marriage fell apart. They continued to communicate and co-parent their child until Bob remarried. When Matthew turned 7, Lynn made the important decision to move to Middletown, Connecticut. Her son stayed with Bob and his wife. The boy was in school, and his parents did not want to subject him to additional stress. Moreover, the environment at his father's home was more stable, so Lynn decided to settle into her new place before bringing her son to live with her. She remained actively involved in Matthew's life. The two cities were about 3.5 hours apart by car, and the mother planned to see her child often. Soon after the move, 39-year-old Lynn got a job as a mechanic in the maintenance department at Wesleyan University, one of America's most prestigious private universities. Despite being far from her family, Stella considered Middletown the perfect place for a fresh start. The town had about 43,000 residents. It had a relaxed atmosphere. The demographic diversity was well suited for a lively college town, which also boasted a low crime rate. The university where Lynn worked had a reputation as one of the best liberal arts colleges in New England, a region in the northeastern United States. Nearly 4,000 students studied there. To distract herself from dark thoughts, Lynn took up furniture restoration, upholstery, and woodworking in her spare time. It was while working on one such order that she met 24-year-old Gina Coxier. Gina became Lynn's first close friend in Connecticut. It started with casual conversation. They quickly hit it off, exchanged phone numbers, and kept in touch from a distance. Soon, the girls began communicating like close friends. Their bond grew so strong that at some point they both realized there might be something much deeper than just friendship. Eventually, a passionate romance sparked. In April 1993, Lynn and Gina became a couple. Neither the 18-year age difference nor the gossip of those around them, nor the likelihood that other family members disapproved of their union could stop them. The women wanted the whole world to know how happy they were together. For Gina, this was her second experience with a non-traditional relationship. For Lynn, it was the first time she felt attracted to a woman. Just 4 months after graduating college, Gina and her charming Pomeranian moved into the house where Lynn lived. The residence was a 2-level apartment with 4 bedrooms in a quiet, upscale neighborhood close to the campus where Stella worked. The woman rented this apartment from one of the college's employees. Later, Lynn and Gina's company was joined by another person. This was Stella's nephew, 25-year-old Ronald Howard King, or Ronnie as his loved ones called him. Ronnie was born in September 1967. As a child, he was very close to Lynn's first son, who died under the wheels of the bus. Now, for her second son, Matthew, Ronald became a true role model. King was a good guy, handsome, modest, and very calm. He always treated his family and loved ones with great care. By the time Ronnie moved into Lynn and Gina's home, he was dedicating many hours to wrestling training, as he was preparing to become a professional wrestler. After moving to Middletown, the young man worked odd jobs at various local restaurants until his aunt got him a position in the maintenance department at Wesleyan University, where she worked. Lynn and Gina often invited friends to their home, and they were valued in the community for their hard work and kindness. Colleagues spoke of them only positively. When a fire broke out in the campus dormitory and several affected students were left literally on the street, the women, without hesitation, offered their apartment as temporary housing. Life in the house could certainly be called happy. Gina and Ronnie, being close in age, got along wonderfully. Matthew spent almost the entire summer with his mother in Connecticut and returned to his father in Maine only in the fall. Everything was going perfectly, until one day, a horrific tragedy struck. On the morning of November 1st, 1993, 43-year-old Lynn and 26-year-old Ronnie, as usual, went to work at Wesleyan University. Before leaving, Stella, as was her habit, deleted old messages from the home answering machine to avoid missing anything important while they were away. That day, Gina, leaving for work, put her little dog in a crate and, as usual, checked all the windows and doors of the house to make sure they were securely locked. It was the day after Halloween, so there was still a hint of the eerie atmosphere from the previous night in the air. But what happened next turned this day into a true nightmare. Around 5:30 p.m., Gina returned home and saw Lynn's car parked in the garage. That meant Lynn and Ronnie should already be home, as their shift had ended almost 2 hours earlier. However, the rooms were unusually quiet, and no lights were on. Gina called out to her loved ones by name, but there was no response. The woman made her way to the kitchen in the dark and suddenly tripped over something on the floor. When she finally turned on the light, a horrifying scene appeared before her. There was blood everywhere, or something that looked very much like it. At first, Gina thought Lynn and Ronnie had decided to prank her, being late with their Halloween jokes. They were lying face down on the floor in a red puddle. Both were still in their coats and work uniforms. At first, Gina couldn't understand what was bothering her about the scene, until her gaze settled on the fabric of Lynn's coat, torn into several pieces. A chill ran down her spine. With each second, it seemed less and less like a joke. Her friend was unlikely to ruin her clothes for a silly prank. A wave of fear washed over Gina. Only now did the full horror of the situation hit her. Before her lay the bodies of two of her closest friends. The young woman began to scream, but her voice broke. She rushed to Lynn and started shaking her, demanding that she stop scaring her. Then she turned to Ronnie. Gina still couldn't accept the fact that she was in a house with two dead people. It just couldn't be true. When her eyes began to take in the rest of the kitchen, she saw that the blood wasn't only on the floor. The walls, table, and kitchen cabinets were also splattered with red. Trying to look at the situation through a detective's eyes, Gina noticed that Lynn and Ronnie had been ambushed as soon as they entered the house. They didn't even have time to change out of their work clothes. On the floor near the bodies lay a knife with a long blade, covered in blood up to the handle. Nearby were shards of a ceramic vase and broken glass lamps. Gina tried desperately to understand what had happened. The woman rushed to the phone to call 911, but something was wrong with the device. In a complete panic, she ran outside and headed to the neighbor's house. Soon, law enforcement officers arrived. Upon learning what had happened, they called for backup and tried to secure the crime scene. Approaching the house, they noticed blood splattered even on the front door and the staircase to the second floor, located right in front of the kitchen. Lynn and Ronnie had been dead for nearly 2 hours, judging by the condition of their bodies. While the officers waited for the experts to arrive, they stood in the kitchen near the bodies, wondering who could have committed such a horrific attack. The house was completely silent. Suddenly, a click sounded. An electronic voice ominously announced that the phone's memory was full. It was the answering machine on the kitchen counter. It was like a message from beyond. The arriving experts discovered that the phone line in the house had been cut. Several knives were missing from the wooden stand in the kitchen. Bullet casings were also found on the floor. One of the knives lay next to a Halloween candy bowl. Another was on the floor, and a third knife was left on the living room table. All of them were stained with something resembling blood. Judging by the various drops leading outside, the perpetrator had also been injured during this brutal attack. The trail ended near the road. It's possible that a car was waiting for the assailant, helping them escape the crime scene. Based on this theory, law enforcement alerted all hospitals in the state to contact the police if anyone sought medical attention for knife wounds. A sample of the suspected perpetrator's blood was taken for analysis, but it's worth noting that this was 1993, when DNA databases were practically non-existent. For this reason, investigators had to rely on other evidence and witness statements. While the labs worked on the evidence, detectives interviewed neighbors. Since nothing was stolen from the house, a botched burglary was immediately ruled out as a motive. However, None of the residents of nearby houses heard or saw anything. No gunshots. No screams. No injured person. There were no suspects in the case except for Gina Coxier, who had discovered the bodies. First, when the authorities arrived at the scene, the woman herself was covered in blood. Second, she mentioned that she had locked her dog in a crate before leaving that morning. This wasn't unusual, but her precautions slightly alarmed the detectives. Gina insisted to the police that she had been at work all day, but her alibi still needed verification. Coxier's clothes and car were seized for forensic examination, and she was suspected of attacking Lynn and Ronnie. Detectives, learning about the relationships in the Stella household, hypothesized that a love triangle might have formed among the three. Gina and Ronnie, who were almost the same age, could have started a secret romance behind Lynn's back. When the woman found out, a scandal could have erupted among the lovers, ending in tragedy. It was still unclear who attacked first, but the investigators were trying to figure it out as quickly as possible. The detectives working on the case analyzed the evidence and crime scene details and concluded that more than one person must have been involved in the attack. To overpower two victims, including Ronnie, who was a wrestler, would have required either additional strength or incredible speed. The attack, it seemed, took place in the kitchen. This was confirmed by the blood splattered on the walls and furniture. The rest of the rooms were untouched. 10 different fingerprints were found at the scene, but no traces of the attacker were left on the knives or the broken lamp. A bloody shoe print from an unknown person was also found on the floor. The shoe size didn't match any of the house's residents. In addition to the broken lamp, shards of a clay vase were scattered on the kitchen floor. On November 2, 1993, after the police informed Lynn and Ronnie's family of the tragic news, they arrived in Middletown to meet with the investigators. The relatives, having lost two family members at once, were deeply shaken and overwhelmed with grief. They unanimously claimed that neither Ronnie nor Lynn had any enemies or ill wishes. Some immediately suspected Gina. Apparently, they had never come to terms with the fact that Lynn had started a relationship with a woman. Fortunately for Gina, the police ruled her out as a suspect. After verifying her alibi, they had no evidence linking her to the crime. Coxier was released. It was a very difficult time for her. She mourned the loss of her beloved partner and roommate, with whom she got along so well. At the same time, people considered her guilty of their deaths. The young woman could no longer stay in the house where the tragedy occurred and hurried back to her family in another state. The autopsy revealed that Ronnie King had been shot. The young man received 3 shots to the chest and abdomen, after which he was stabbed 6 times. Additionally, he had been struck on the head with a heavy blunt object, likely the clay vase. Lynn Stella received 14 stab wounds to her face, neck, chest, and back. Some of the injuries were inflicted while the woman was already on the floor. There was also a mark on her head from a blow with a heavy object. It was likely caused by the lamp. Before that, Lynn had been shot several times, leaving her with virtually no chance of survival. The brutality with which the blows were struck suggested that the crime might have been personal. The stab wounds directly to her face indicated that the assailant clearly wanted to disfigure her. The coroner suggested that both Lynn and Ronnie died slowly, suffering intense pain in their final moments. They lay on the kitchen floor for at least 10 minutes after the attack ended. The cause of death was multiple injuries and massive blood loss. Investigators worked diligently to piece together the events leading up to the attack. It turned out that Lynn and Ronnie had left work around 3:30 p.m., driving their usual route. They entered the house. Detectives were certain this was not a random act of violence, that at least one of the assailants was acquainted with one of the victims, as the crime clearly had a personal motive. The attackers used multiple methods to take the lives of Ronnie and Lynn. When investigators questioned residents of the neighborhood where the victims rented their home, a witness recalled seeing a couple, a man and a woman, walking near Stella's residence that day. They were clearly from another area. The man was dressed in tight jeans and wore something like a cap on his head. The woman had shoulder-length dark hair and a tanned face. She wore an unbuttoned pastel yellow windbreaker or hoodie and corduroy jeans. The witness noticed their clothing because it didn't match the weather. It was cold outside. Given the time of year, Most people were wearing coats and warm jackets. The witness was also struck by how the woman kept her right hand in her pocket, holding it with her left hand, as if trying to hide something. Before we continue with the final part of this heartbreaking story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notification so you never miss another deep, emotional, and shocking true crime case. Your support helps us share stories that deserve to be heard. On November 4th, Middletown investigators contacted the police department in Vermont, where Gina Coxier was from, and asked for assistance. Detectives methodically called Lynn and Ronnie's acquaintances to rule out possible theories and gather as much information about the victims as possible. In the house where the tragedy occurred, one of the detectives found Stella's personal notebook with phone numbers and addresses. In the contact list on the last page, there was a name, Janet, and a phone number clearly written in haste. Next to it was a Vermont phone number. State authorities were able to determine who it belonged to. The number was registered to 47-year-old Janet Griffin, a friend of Gina Coxier. When the police visited her to ask some questions, the woman was very surprised. She explained that she had met Lynn through Gina when they hung out together. Janet was completely bewildered. She knew her friend was very happy with Stella, but had no idea who might want to harm them. At the time, Griffin was doing everything she could to provide emotional support to Gina. However, she didn't know Lynn very well, so she couldn't provide any information. Still, the detectives needed to rule out every person in Lynn's phone book, so they asked Janet about her whereabouts on November 1st, 1993. Griffin said she worked as a senior housekeeper at an exclusive ski resort, but that day was her day off, so she went shopping with her colleague, Gordon Fruin. Investigators noted that Janet matched some of the witness descriptions. Moreover, they noticed several cuts on her right palm and pinky finger. Her claim that she was with a male colleague that day only heightened the police's suspicions. Janet explained that she had cut her hand while trying to unscrew a light bulb from a lampshade. The woman was willing to provide a blood sample for analysis and insisted she had nothing to do with what happened at Stella's house. After the conversation with Griffin, the officers met with her colleague, 31-year-old Gordon Fruin. The man fully corroborated Janet's story, and there were no wounds on his hands. He was quite slim and lanky, so he likely wouldn't have been able to overpower Ronnie King in an attack. At that moment, the police were ready to cross him off the list of potential suspects when one of Gordon's remarks caught their attention. He mentioned that he identified as part of the non-traditional orientation community, just like Janet. When asked to elaborate, he explained that Griffin and Coxier had been in a romantic relationship but had broken up at least a couple of years earlier. To dig deeper, investigators ran a background check on Janet. It turned out that during her relationship with Gina, the police were frequently called to their home due to various incidents, usually caused by Griffin. On November 5th, a joint funeral for Lynn and Ronnie was held at St. Mark's Episcopal Church, attended by over 220 people. While close friends said their goodbyes to the victims, detectives continued to search for additional evidence in the case. They finally turned their attention to the disconnected phone line and the answering machine full of messages. Investigators decided to listen to the tape for any messages that might provide a clue to solving the crime, but what they heard exceeded their expectations. Throughout the recording, Gina's dog could be heard barking from its crate, so the officers initially struggled to make out the meaning of the words in the background. Amid the dog's barking, crashing, and the sound of breaking glass, two female voices could be clearly distinguished. A heated argument was clearly brewing between them. One voice begged for mercy while the other hurled accusations at her opponent. Then the second woman addressed someone by the name Butch. The recording lasted for 7 minutes. It seemed the answering machine had captured the crime in real time, meaning someone in the house had pressed the record button, anticipating that the unexpected encounter could turn into a nightmare. Most likely, Lynn had done this deliberately to protect herself in some way. The officers made a copy of the answering machine tape and sent it to the FBI so technical experts could remove the background noise and enhance the audio quality for clearer analysis. It didn't take long for investigators to discover that Butch was actually Gordon Fruin's nickname, a playful reference to his modest physical build. The enhanced version of the recording made it possible to discern the words of others present in the kitchen at the time. A woman could be heard asking her accomplice to bring a knife while Lynn begged for mercy and pleaded for them to at least let Ronnie go, as he was completely innocent. Additionally, Lynn could be heard addressing the attacker by name, Janet. This evidence was a major breakthrough in the investigation as it captured the voices of both the perpetrator and her accomplice. However, it was still only circumstantial evidence. Something more substantial was needed. At that moment, detectives decided to speak with Gordon Fruin again. And this time, the man, unable to withstand the interrogation, confessed everything to the police. All it took was a mention of the answering machine recording. His story was as follows. On November 1st, around 10:30 a.m., Janet Griffin and her 25-year-old daughter, Melody, arrived at Gordon's house in a rented car. He explained that he had no idea something terrible was about to happen. At first, he didn't even know they were heading to Lynn and Gina's place. Only after Fruin got into the car did Janet mention they were going to Middletown to visit her former girlfriend. On the way, the group listened to old songs on the radio and sang along cheerfully. Everyone was in a great mood. Upon reaching the right street, Melody parked the rented car a little ways off and stayed there while Gordon and Janet headed to Gina's house. Griffin, without even knocking, opened the front door and walked inside while Gordon stayed on the porch, waiting to be invited in. He claimed he had no idea what Janet was planning. While outside, Gordon heard 4 or 5 gunshots followed by a woman's scream. He ran into the house and heard voices coming from the kitchen. Janet was arguing with Lynn, and both women turned to him for help. Griffin asked him to help her restrain Lynn while Stella begged him to call 911. The homeowner saw a strange man and, assuming he was a neighbor or a passerby who had come running at the sound of screams, desperately pleaded with him to call the police. She had no idea Gordon was Janet's friend. Then, according to Fruin, he approached the phone, but Griffin, holding a knife, cut the phone cord and then turned and began stabbing Lynn in the neck with the same knife. Later, she smashed a lamp over the homeowner's head and struck Ronnie on the head with a ceramic vase. During the attack, Janet cut her hand on glass shards. When it was over, the woman turned to her friend and declared that he was now an accomplice to the crime. This threat had a real impact on him. That's why he didn't initially tell investigators the whole truth. The perpetrators left the house after ensuring that Ronnie and Lynn were dead. They returned to the parked car where Melody was waiting and fled the crime scene. On the way out of Middletown, they stopped at a nearby pond so Janet could dispose of the gun. Back home, Gordon helped his friend bandage the wound on her hand while Melody returned the rented car. In essence, the man claimed he had no idea about Janet's plans and that he didn't participate in the massacre. Gordon allegedly didn't even know Griffin had brought a gun. The next person the detectives wanted to speak with was Janet's daughter, Melody. At first, the girl claimed she was at work at the ski resort that day. But when the police explained that this could easily be verified and that lying could lead to charges, Melody confirmed Gordon's account. According to her, she only drove her mother and her friend to the neighboring state. They wanted to visit Gina Coxier and then go shopping. Melody dropped Janet and Gordon off near Gina's house and went about her own business. On the way back, she got a little lost. When she approached the car, her mother and her friend were already waiting there. Melody noticed a bleeding cut on her mother's hand. Janet explained that she had accidentally cut herself. The girl told the officers she wasn't part of any conspiracy and had no idea what had happened inside the house where Gina lived. Her mother was in poor health and physically wouldn't have had the strength to kill 2 adults. Janet had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She often fainted and was very vulnerable. However, the next day, Melody overheard her mother and Gordon discussing the horrific crime at work, which raised strange suspicions in the girl. But wanting to quickly push these disturbing thoughts out of her mind, Melody didn't tell anyone. She just wanted to protect her mother. By now, the police had enough evidence to arrest Janet and charge her with the massacre. On November 9, 1993, Griffin was arrested. She was to be extradited to Connecticut. If found guilty, she faced either the death penalty or life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Despite the charges, Janet insisted on her innocence and remained silent during interrogations. Meanwhile, Gina Coxier couldn't believe that her former lover was responsible for Lynn and Ronnie's deaths. She had never heard Janet say anything bad about Lynn. After their breakup, the women maintained a friendly relationship. Not only Gina, but everyone who knew Janet closely was shocked by the arrest and the charges. No one believed this woman was capable of taking a life. Janet herself wasn't about to give up without a fight. She did everything she could to delay her reckoning. Through her lawyer, Griffin contested her extradition from Vermont to Connecticut, forcing the grieving families of Lynn and Ronnie to wait endlessly for justice to prevail. As a result, another charge was added to her list: obstructing justice. The police needed additional evidence to ensure Janet faced consequences for her crime. With Gordon's help, they found a .32 caliber firearm at the bottom of an artificial pond about a meter deep. It was an antique revolver, impossible to buy in a regular gun store. It was immediately sent to a forensic lab for testing, where it was confirmed that the bullets found in Lynn and Ronnie's bodies were fired from this revolver. In December, Janet was finally extradited to Middletown, where the crime had occurred. She became the first woman in Connecticut to stand trial for a capital offense. The prosecution team found a witness who could confirm that Griffin had long planned to get rid of Lynn Stella. This witness was 36-year-old Natalie Jurgen, a colleague and friend of Janet's, who rented her a place to live. She provided testimony in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Natalie reported that in the months leading up to the massacre, she and Janet made 4 trips from Vermont to Middletown between August 14th and November 1st. During these trips, Griffin familiarized herself with the location of Lynn's house and the neighborhood's layout. Initially, she told Natalie she wanted to write insults on Stella's car with a permanent marker, but she never followed through. A few weeks later, Janet confessed to Natalie that she wanted to win Gina back. And to do so, she needed to eliminate Lynn, who had interfered in their lives and ruined everything. Griffin outlined a specific plan to ambush her rival on her way to work. She planned to wait until Lynn stopped at a stop sign, shoot her, and then set the car on fire. Janet asked Natalie to drive her to Connecticut for this purpose. When Jurgen refused, she threatened to kill Natalie's children. Fortunately, that day, Stella took a different route home, and the assassination attempt failed. It was fear for her family that prevented the witness from reporting the planned crime to law enforcement. Story concludes in next message. If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of our true crime community. Stories like these remind us of the deep emotional scars that crimes leave behind. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell notification so you never miss another real story that deserves to be told. See you in the next one.